Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are, whoever you are. This is Dr. Patrick Lockwood back with you live. In fact, let's tweet just for the fun of it and see what the hell happens. Maybe I can share it on here too. Let's share it via Twitter. Let's go on Twitter and see what happens and have a little fun. See if it works. Okay, it's shared. Let's see if anyone comes. Oh, and there we go. Here we are, looking spiffy, Bobby says. I didn't get a haircut. It's the same. It's just pushed. Anyways, so today we're going to have a little fun, and we're going to talk a little bit about a Buddhist concept. And the reason, it's the lack of the headset. Yes, absolutely. And the reason that I want to talk about a Buddhist concept called beginner's mind is both somewhat very straightforward and maybe not so much. So here's what I was thinking. And I'll get back to the comments after I make some thoughts here. So we seem to be living in a world nowadays where knowing things very quickly is praised. And I, on the one hand, kind of like that because I think it encourages knowing things. On the other hand, I think it's a problem because we are being, let's say, convinced that knowing things very quickly is a good thing. And I don't know if that's always true. I don't know. Isn't that interesting? So here's some examples of how knowing things very quickly is a normal thing here on planet Earth, and especially Western cultures. So on Twitter, for instance, I often see people from every sector of the world, every country, every industry, whether it's academia or bloggers or students or researchers or politicians or news people, whatever it is. I think what's interesting is every time I see people on Twitter talking about a topic, they have to kind of instantaneously respond as if they know something. And I myself get caught up in this, and I do this all the time. Rarely do I see people say on Twitter, for instance, I'm not sure. Let me think about that. Right? There was this hashtag that was going around the other day. What was it? Get me naked in 5 words or less, or something like that. And I think what I posted was, let me think about that, were my 5 words. And the reason I posted that is because it's kind of a missing attitude that we have nowadays. We have to kind of know things very quickly on Twitter in particular in order to keep up banter and keep up the fight. Heaven forbid you take 20 minutes or 30 minutes to actually look through a topic and, go like, hey, I don't really know. Let me take a look around first and I'll get back to you. Like, that's not an attitude that works on social media. But is that a good thing? I'm not so sure. Another easy example of how knowing things quickly has become the norm is in academia. And I'm obviously biased because of the area in which I teach, and I teach graduate students. So it's kind of the, theoretically speaking, top rung of you're supposed to know stuff world. So I'll give you an easy example. So one of the many ways that classes are set up, especially smaller classes, one of them I taught last semester in particular, is that you're really supposed to have many, many in-depth conversations about a topic. In a course that I taught last semester on adolescent psychopathology, we kind of looked at, what the research articles said about a particular topic in adolescent psychopathology every week. So like adolescent psychopathology related to depression or something like that. And what I noticed was, as we were discussing the research articles the students brought in, is that they kind of had this urge to respond right away, which was interesting because, yeah, of course, it's grad school. You want to make sure you look good in front of the professor, and you want to make sure that, you really do know things, because you're supposed to be at this tier in life where people really know things, and then you can go out and help people in the world and stuff. The problem is, maybe we don't question our basic assumptions enough when we're talking about important topics. And obviously, in both examples I mentioned, the tendency to know stuff right away is a perfectly normal tendency. It is kind of it's not only an expectation, but it's kind of one of those like, there's no big deal kind of mentalities around knowing things right away. And I propose, however, that maybe we don't need to know when we're learning or discussing things online. Maybe it's okay not to know. And to kind of further that idea, I'm going to steal from the Buddhism guru Jack Kornfield for a second, because I followed him for a long time, and it seems like as much as he is a guru kind of person, there are some insightful things that I really do appreciate from Jack. And one of them is a quote on beginner's mind. And he said, and I quote on his website, which I'll link in the caption, "The wisdom of uncertainty frees us from what the Buddhist psychology calls the thicket of views and opinions." Now, I'm not going to elaborate on that concept because I am not a Buddhist scholar, a Buddhist psychology scholar. There's a brilliant book by David Rice Myers from like 1928 on Buddhist psychology, or maybe it's from his wife, old British guy. And it's a great Buddhist psychology book. You should read it. But in Buddhist psychology, there's this concept, the thicket of views and opinions. It's basically, there's this overwhelming number of ideas that we have, especially if you're an expert. And theoretically, the Buddha said, seeing a misery in those who cling to views, a wise person should not adopt any of them. A wise person does not by opinions become arrogant. How could anyone bother those who are free, who do not grasp at any views? But those who grasp after views and opinions wander about the world annoying people. Which is interesting, because for me, at least, I have always had the mentality of knowing things. Knowing things has kind of been my bread and butter, from graduate school to undergrad to, trying to be a professor and pretending like I know things, and being a psychologist and a therapist and pretending like I know things about mental health. It's almost as if, and I say pretending somewhat facetiously and somewhat seriously, because, how can I really know, right? And it's the mentality that we're coached into. A lot of people are coached into. I think society as a whole coaches us into knowing things. The problem is it gets us stuck in this, as the Buddha said, miserable place of clinging to views. There's suffering in clinging to the idea that things should be a certain way. So that's where a concept like beginner's mind might be a somewhat useful thing for us to consider here in our little chat here today. And for those of you commenting, I will be right back. So what is beginner's mind officially? Where does it come from? So the definition I'm about to give you is kind of a hodgepodge of various books and online resources that I've read about, particularly related to Zen Buddhism, for about the last 12 years. So beginner's mind, simply put, is an attitude of being open to information, actively ignoring one's preconceived notions as they arise while experiencing an interaction or learning a concept. It should feel in the moment as if your consciousness is empty and fully receptive. And I'm going to say that one more time because it's as simple as I can make it, but it's still complex. So beginner's mind, simply put, this is my hodgepodge definition, is an attitude of being open to information while actively ignoring one's preconceived notions as they arise while experiencing an interaction or learning a concept. And it should feel in the moment as if your consciousness is empty and fully receptive. And I know that sounds kind of woo-woo and airy-fairy and Deepak Chopra, so please don't call me Deepak Chopra, because it kind of is. The problem is it's not something that we're conditioned by modern society to do, from what I can tell. And this concept originally, to my knowledge, comes from the 1970 book by, Suzuki is the last name. I'm not going to say first name because I'm not that articulate. But it's called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And it's one of the fundamental Zen Buddhist concepts that I think would be useful for us as we try and go about our daily life at work, at school, on Twitter, all these different places. Now, this is somewhat similar to Alan Marlett's concept in the mindfulness-based relapse prevention world for addiction called urge surfing. And, urge surfing is a very helpful attitude. It's kind of noticing the urge without having to do anything with it, just being open to what the urge is and not having to go any one particular way when you experience the urge. It's a very helpful concept. And I think that's why this is a compatible concept, a companion concept to urge surfing, beginner's mind. So I think it's one of those kind of evidentiary concepts that's sound. So let me think about some ways out loud that we could apply this attitude of being open to information while actively ignoring one's preconceived notions as a means for doing basically three things. Number one, having less conflict and suffering less because we're not attached to how things should be. Number two, learning something about either yourself or the other person. And number three, kind of promoting a healthier culture, a culture wherein we can really be open with each other. Because right now it seems as if we have a fairly defensive culture, at least online and in certain circles. So in order to have like a healthier level of less defensiveness, maybe this beginner's mind concept could be useful. So those are the three intended consequences of beginner's mind, in my opinion. So how would you apply this with family and friends? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is most people nowadays are arguing about, I don't know, politics or Donald Trump. So what if, as opposed to taking all of your preconceived notions about, let's say, Donald Trump and going, he's terrible, which is what a lot of people think, or he's great, which is what another segment of the population thinks, or I don't know what to think about him, which is the third group of people, typically speaking. What if you just didn't have any of those attitudes? What if you didn't have to know anything about the guy? What if it was just this thing happened and that's it? Right? So the popular topic that I think happened yesterday was, I think our buddy Trump made some tweet about Baltimore and, and it's infested with rats or something like that. I don't know. And then it got spun as racist. And then I don't know. There are all sorts of bad things. It blew up the Twitterverse. And the point of the matter is, it's all nonsense, number one. And number two, what if it was just, okay, so he said this thing. A beginner's mind applied to that would be something like, okay, he said it's infested with rats. My preconceived notion is that Baltimore is such and such. My preconceived notion is that Trump is such and such. My preconceived notion is that Twitter means such and such. These people's words mean such and such. Now I'm going to actively ignore them, and I'm going to be open to what was said. I'm just going to think about it. And I'm just going to explore what was said. And I'm going to compare it to reality. I'm going to compare it to all the things that exist in the universe that are related to whatever was said by the guy. And theoretically speaking, if you actually look at the information in an unbiased way, you're probably going to come at some kind of middle ground interpretation of what the guy said, even though it might be used. He may have used incendiary language that doesn't necessarily mean that the content is inaccurate. And that's the problem, is we all get caught up on the left and the right and the middle and all this stuff. We get caught up in the incendiary language and we miss the actual message of things. So there's one example. Family and friends, you argue about Donald Trump. Or you could just be like, maybe he's terrible, maybe he's not. Maybe he's correct, maybe he's not. How do I know he's not correct? Right? Same thing with social media. Like, all these people are arguing so incessantly for no good reason. It makes no sense to me. Right? What if you didn't have to have that predatory aggressive, like, I'm going to get him on Twitter or on Facebook or on wherever? Like, how pleasant is that experience for you? And how useful is that experience for you in terms of maintaining and fostering relationships? I don't think it is. So maybe you could apply it to the next, contentious post that you find on social media or tweet, right? Or at work. What if you can't stand your boss, which is for many people the truth? What if you were to take a beginner's mind approach to your boss? So your boss is demanding, right? Kind of textbook Western Society 101 problem. Okay. What if I was trying to be open to new information about my boss being demanding, about your boss being demanding? What does that mean, really? Right? How do we actively ignore a preconceived notion about someone being demanding? Right? What does that mean? It means going, okay, right now I'm having this reaction to my boss asking me to do something or putting pressure on me to do something. What is really going on with my boss? What is really going on with me? What are my simple principles, simple experiences, emotions, needs that are being activated in this moment? What are their simple experiences that are causing them to do this? And then you can investigate. Because usually what happens is especially when it comes to a person, we kind of resort to ad hominem or just judgment and name calling in our head. They're a bad person. My boss is a dick, whatever. And that doesn't really actually get into the psychology of why the person's doing what they're doing. Maybe your boss is afraid. Maybe there's a problem with the bottom line. Maybe there's a problem with the client, whatever it is, right? That is something you have to keep in mind and then when you do that, you can have compassion. So beginner's mind really can allow you to have compassion for people. And in academia too, in school, whether it's high school, elementary school, if you're a teacher, or if you're a student in college or grad school, you can use beginner's mind to, let's say, learn better, to learn more, to see more, right? It really does benefit both the teacher and the student. And the educational psychology research is fairly straightforward, fairly in the same direction in terms of the concept of what we call transformative learning. And basically what it shows is when we walk into a situation with a closed-minded approach, I already know what I need to know, or we simply hold on to our assumptions about an idea that our assumptions are true, then we're more closed-minded to a new or conflicting information, and we tend to write it off, and we don't really assimilate it into a new concept. We kind of keep it an old schema and either take the parts of that new idea that fit with it and reject the rest, or just outright reject the new idea. So if we use transformative learning as a mindset, as a meta learning principle, as one article called it, I'll post in the caption, then we're more likely to learn. We're more likely to expand our consciousness and what we think is true about a concept, which is great. So that's why beginner's mind, there's a corollary to what's called transformative learning. So that's another pitch for why maybe beginner's mind is a useful concept. So, and I'll leave you with a final question here before I go and start talking with people and having fun here. So I'm making a pitch here for beginner's mind, for trying to see things openly, letting go of preconceived notions, and even the most rudimentary things like, this person's wrong. I shouldn't feel this way, stuff like that. What is the real practical and serious consequence of not knowing something? The next time you're in a conversation with someone, with a friend, the next time you're in class, the next time you're at work, the next time you're at the gym, etc. What is the real serious consequence of not knowing something when you're having a conversation with someone or learning a new concept, when you're discussing an idea with someone? And I don't know how to answer that for myself because I live in a fairly, what I would call, safe world where I can ask pretty insane questions or think pretty insane things and benefit from them and learn. Other people, it might not be that safe, especially in certain industries. But what is the real practical and serious consequence of not knowing something? The next time a contentious topic comes up, what's the real serious and practical consequence of saying, I don't really know? I'm open to learning. Maybe you're right. Maybe Trump's a horrible person. Or maybe you're right. Maybe he's a great person. Or maybe this is good. Or maybe this is bad. Or maybe this helps. Or maybe this doesn't help. Right? What is the real serious consequence of not knowing something? I don't know. But I'll leave you with that question. And now let's have a little fun and let's chat with people, because this is the Psychology Checkup, and I'm happy to provide a checkup for anyone who is commenting. So please comment, like, and share. So Sam Blake says, hi. Hello, Sam. How are you doing? I hope you're well. Bobby says, hi. Bobby Snicker says, this is the problem with on-demand culture. Absolutely. Totally. You know, I agree. My first instinct is absolutely on-demand culture is getting us in this place of having to know things when we don't necessarily need to know things. Or maybe knowing things quickly is useful in some ways, but not in other ways. And that's my argument. He says, where's Shanny Boo Buns? Andrea, the other 95, says, oh, I saw that and posted mine immediately in 6 words. I clearly failed the test. That's funny, Andrea. You failed nothing. You're just a person. Be okay. It's okay. The other 95 says, then how do you not get pushed and pulled from one argument to another? Huh. If you're hearing arguments on different sides, well, being pushed and pulled seems like a mental concept to me. And you tell me if I'm wrong or if I'm misreading what you're saying or your intentions. How do you not get pushed and pulled from one argument to another if you're hearing arguments on different sides? Well, why do you have to choose? Where does the desire to choose come from? That would be kind of my first instinct and my first question is like, okay, why do you have to choose? Because I think we've been conditioned to choose a side. You know, the easy example being, Donald Trump is always like, he's terrible. This idea is terrible. This thing he's doing is great, etc. We are kind of socially conditioned, I think, to choose. I just don't believe that we need to. We feel the urge to. We feel compelled to because we're used to relating very, very quickly to people, especially with technology, especially on Twitter. I don't necessarily believe that that's necessary, even though there's this sense that it's necessary. But I could be wrong about that. Bobby Snicker says, I sure love you. What he said is true. It's accurate, but he could definitely be more intentional with words. Yeah, that's true. Donald Trump could certainly be more intentional with words. That's for sure. Yeah, so this is my very brief, my very simple pitch for beginner's mind. It's an open, non-judgmental way of approaching learning and conversing, basically. And it really is an active pushing away of what we think we know. And what's funny is I even caught myself struggling with this whenever I created this talk because I wanted to know so badly what exactly the concept was. And literally the hardest thing about this talk was not, figuring out if it's true or whatever. It was, being able to define it in a way that made sense. And I came to realize I didn't have to know, which was hilarious because that was the whole point of the talk. Sakemin says, why even bother with the arguments? You should know what the consequences are and make a decision. Well, okay, let me think about that for a second. Why even bother with the arguments? Well, okay, so maybe there's not a necessity to argue. Maybe there is. I think it's the necessity part that I find myself caught on because I think we feel some pull, some push, some necessity for arguing. I think culture certainly, encourages us to argue. If you look at the online culture in a place like Twitter or Facebook and others, it's definitely arguing is the norm. It's a good thing. In fact, being able to be good at arguing is something that is praised and valued, So I don't know. I think there's that urge that we feel, and that urge is somewhat socially conditioned, for sure. Then you said you should know what the consequences are and make a decision. It's important to think through what the consequences are of your words, for sure, because especially in the online world, they don't disappear anymore. If all the stuff that's happened with Kyle Kashuv and other people like him is emblematic of anything, it's that your words will follow you for a long, long time, especially if they can be used to destroy you or as political tools. And at this point, you know, if you don't know the potential implications of what you're going to say, you might step on a landmine for sure. So I guess there's a necessity for defensiveness there that you're pointing out. I don't know if I personally would hope for that for the people, but maybe we need that nowadays. I myself kind of operate with reckless abandon on Twitter. I pretty much say anything that comes to mind, and that has both positive and negative consequences. For some reason, people still follow me, which is phenomenal. I don't necessarily believe that what I'm doing is particularly special, but apparently my insanity is palatable for some people. I don't know. I think there's also an attitude thing that's worth considering here, which goes back to the concept of beginner's mind. If you really are trying to engage seriously with people and openly with people, people tend to take that better. It's my experience. I don't see many downsides from at least where I sit here for a beginner's mind. I don't know. So Bobby says, people being idiots and brainwashed definitely brings about the argument. Well, yeah, that's true. There's definitely people being idiots is probably a fairly judgmental term, but I understand the use of it because I used to say idiot all the time. I used to be a lot like Nassim Taleb, where called people morons and idiots all the time, and that got me all sorts of nowhere in my life. But yeah, it's definitely the case where if we're closed-minded, which I might switch out for idiot. If you're being closed-minded and brainwashed, it definitely can for sure either increase the incendiary nature of an argument and turn up the gas in the fire, or it can start an argument for sure. And I think again, we're somewhat socially conditioned into making these arguments happen, which is a problem in my opinion, because we all instinctually definitely want to get along. We want to fight and we want to get along. And our urge to fight, I think, and I could totally be wrong about this, I should probably be more open-minded about this. I believe that our desire for reciprocity and cooperation is equally as strong, if not stronger, than our desire to fight as higher primates. But I could be totally wrong about that. If you look at chimpanzees and bonobos, our closest cousins, I think that's the case. So why not focus on that side of things? It's not that kumbaya is possible. It's never possible. It's just to say that, if you use concepts like beginner's mind, maybe it's easier to cooperate and really get to that next level of understanding a concept, whether it's something incendiary like what Donald Trump said, or if it's something practical like, how to do calculus. Beginner's mind is going to help with that, Bobby says, okay, how about ideological and brainwashed? Sure, that's fine. That's a little less judgmental. Bobby says, bonobos just want to bang all day. That's true. My understanding of the literature about bonobos is they are more sexually engaged. I think if you read Franz de Waal's work on them, I think it's Franz. And, they say hello by sex. They say goodbye. They make up after fights with sex. It's all sorts of good stuff. So yeah, I get that. It's funny. So yeah, this is my pitch for beginner's mind. An open attitude when discussing or learning where one is actively acknowledging, and then ignoring your preconceived notions about a topic. Because if you think about any beginner in any discipline, any idea, any concept, whether it's something rudimentary like, learning how to do a push-up, or something extremely complex like differential equations, you have to go in with the attitude of, well, I think I know this stuff. The problem is all this complex stuff that I have to do, posture, form, all that good stuff, or how to use different mathematical concepts, etc. You have to really go in with the idea that I know this, but I don't know this, this, and this. So maybe not knowing this, this, and this means I need to pay attention and be open to new things, you know? And the other thing is, a lot of what we think we know might be biased. So maybe there's less of a need for that, you know? I don't know. Sakeman. An argument will try to persuade based on pushing certain virtues, values, and preferences over others. The problem is the rule changes may do nothing or even make things worse. So the first half of your statement, if I heard you correctly, is an explanation of how arguments work. They persuade based on virtues, values, and preferences over others. I mean, off the top of my head, that makes sense to me. But then the second half of your statement, I'm struggling with just for a little bit here. The problem is the rule changes may do nothing or even make things worse. Are you talking about the rule changes with regard to being open and just listening and ignoring one's preconceived notions? Because if that's the case, okay, I'm open to that conversation about, how that could be problematic and have negative consequences. I also believe that it's quite literally impossible to avoid a lot of negative consequences just because many negative consequences are not predictable, or many that we think are predictable are not predictable. So there's that. So I'll give you a minute to respond here, and then if not, we'll get going. Segment, people argue over how things should be. Just take any topic, like the definition of sexual assault. Okay, cool. How things should be is a moral problem, right? And that's where we get into very tricky territory. And I think I had at least one conversation this last week on Twitter about morals and consciousness. And I tend to stay away from the problem of morality because I myself don't consider myself very moral, number one. And number two, I don't believe that there is a way to reconcile all of our philosophical understanding about morals and beliefs in a way that actually smooths things out for different cultures all over the world. My sincere belief about how things should be is we have an instinctual nature that serves us, and we have an instinctual nature that doesn't serve us. And I think figuring out that middle ground between how it serves us and doesn't serve us is really, the sticking point for me. But I don't touch morals outside of that. Sakeman says, now people will try to say they are against sexual assault and virtue signal for certain changes. But if you examine the changes, everything is just so much worse. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, a lot of our reactionary choices when we're emotionally hijacked, which we'll plug, shameless plug, The Fear Problem. Get the book, Amazon.com, PatrickLockwoodHealing.com. When we're activated and we're in our more reactionary nature and we're kind of arguing for progress or change or whatever it is, we're likely going to have some missteps because our highly emotional nature does not make us the most critically minded creatures. It's that simple. So you're right. It may make things worse. Or I agree with you. You're right is probably going too far, but I agree with you at the very least. So yeah, it's an interesting, tricky thing. So this is my little pitch for Beginner's Mind. I hope that it was somehow useful, somehow helpful. If it was, please like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate any support you all can give me. Please follow me on minds.com, www.minds.com. And if you feel so compelled to help me fund some of the other stuff that I'm doing, you can donate to my PayPal, all that good stuff. I really am trying to do a bunch of different projects at once, some of which require money. But yeah, thanks for coming out. Thanks for chatting. Appreciate all of you who are chatting. And I will talk to you again in about a week. Have a good Sunday. and I will see you soon.